All right, everyone, I want to do a quick audio test. If you can hear me, would you mind just sending over a quick message in that Zoom chat window? Both myself and Monica had just sent over a quick message to everyone. Perfect. Okay, so there's most people saying they can hear me. There's a few people who I see do not have their audio set up still, so I'll give them about another minute or two, and then we can go ahead and dive into the masterclass for today. All right, it looks like those final few folks have their audio all set up, so we'll go ahead and dive into today's masterclass on zipForm Essentials. This masterclass will really just take about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on questions. Want to make sure we dive straight into zipForm and then get you on with your day. As we're going through this session, please feel free to chat over any questions that you have in that Zoom chat window, and I'll make sure to go through those towards the very end of the session. I am recording the session for today, so if you notice that you're on mute, it's just to ensure that we have the best listening quality for that recording, which we can absolutely send over to you after the session has concluded. Now, diving here into SkySlope, one of the first things I want to talk to you in regards to the zipForm Essentials piece is how to integrate your zipForm account with SkySlope. As soon as you log into your account and select your name in the upper right-hand corner, there's your My Account section. Within this My Account area, there's a tab dedicated to integrations here in the far right. And what this section allows you to do is enter in your zipForm username and your zipForm password. As soon as you have that information set up inside of SkySlope and save, your two accounts are really synced. That meaning that anything you're doing with zipForms inside of SkySlope, which we'll talk about, is accessible back in zipForm, and anything you're doing in zipForm is accessible back here in SkySlope. Now, where we access the zipForm integration inside of SkySlope is here in the lower right for working documents. In this section, we have a tab that's dedicated to our zipForm account. And once the two accounts are synced, and we just walked through with the integrating process, we have all of our existing zipForm transactions right here on the left for us. And then any forms within those transactions are just accessible right in the center here. Now, when you are first starting out with your client and you need to open up a new zipForm transaction or zipForm file, there are two different options that you can work through. We do have the ability to create our zipForm Plus transaction right here inside of SkySlope. So I'll walk through that first and then show you the second way. In this screen, I can see the ability to add in some basic transaction detail here. So I have my transaction name, my address. I could show additional fields if I want to add in offer details, or maybe some information about my clients, whether they're sellers or buyers. All of this information really is what's populating the cover sheet for zipForms. As soon as we have that data entered and create the file, we're able to pull in any forms from our zipForm library. So let's say I want to pull in a cover sheet, maybe a lead paint disclosure and a listing contract. I could pull those in here. And as soon as I add them, I see this new zipForm transaction for Taylor Test on the left with those 3 forms that I just pulled in right in the center. So that's one way that you can open up your new zipForm transaction when you're just starting out with your client. But what you can also do is you can also start in zipForm directly. Now, inside of your zipForm account, there's the ability to create a new file. We'll say this is that same example. We'll say this is a listing. And then enter that basic data again. So we have Taylor Test 2 here is a residential property. But I have here in zipForms the ability to select a template. Now, what these templates inside of zipForm allow you to do is they allow you to pull in a packet full of documents. So if you have those packets created or templates, such as a residential listing, you can actually pull in a template full of documents rather than individually selecting them like I just showed you from SkySlope. Now, one thing to keep in mind is this is just my demo zipForm account, so you might see different options here. But as soon as we save, I'm then taken into this Taylor Test 2 zipForm transaction. In my documents section here for zipForm, I see that there's multiple different documents that have pulled in automatically. Now that's really what the benefit of those templates in zipForm offer you to do, is pull this whole packet in automatically. You can set up templates if you don't have them created inside of zipForm directly here in the Templates tab. But again, those templates pull in your documents automatically rather than individually selecting them. Now, back here inside of SkySlope, if I refresh my page or reload this page, I see that I have that new Taylor Test 2 zipForm transaction right here on the left with each of those different documents right in the center. So again, 2 different ways to create your zipForm transactions, which is opening up your file for your new client, whether that is here inside of SkySlope, creating your new transaction and pulling in the forms you need manually, or starting out in zipForms, pulling in your template or packet of documents, and having those available back in SkySlope as well. Now, once I have my new zipForm transaction opened for my client, what I would recommend doing as a best practice is to fill out your cover sheet first. You can select that document name there, and it opens up in this preview window. Now, the benefit of filling out your cover sheet first is that when these fields are on your different contracts, whether that's a listing agreement or a lead paint, the fields will automatically populate based on the information that is in your cover sheet. So it really saves you some time when you're filling out those future forms rather than typing the same thing over and over again. One thing to keep in mind is that if you edit this form, let's say I change that price that I have here, there is the ability to save the information, so it does not auto-save. However, if I try to click out of this contract here, or the cover sheet I should say, it does prompt me to save before continuing. Now, you would really walk through that process with each additional form that you need to add terms into. So if I need to add more information to my standard listing contract, I select that document name, and then it opens up in this window just like we saw the cover sheet. However, here, I'm really filling in those extra terms rather than the basic information on the cover sheet. Now that's really how you fill out the information on the form. Once we fill that out and save here in SkySlope, we can also see that exact same information back inside of zipForms. And if I prefer maybe to fill out my cover sheet or my listing contract here inside of zipForms and save, that information that I've added is also available back here in SkySlope. So the two accounts truly are synced. Again, to reiterate, what's happening in SkySlope here is reflected back in zipForm. And what happens in zipForm is then reflected back here in SkySlope. Now, at this point, we have created our new zipForm transaction. We have filled out some of the documents. When we're ready to send these documents out for a digital signature, that's when you could select them here and access DigiSign. DigiSign is SkySlope's digital signature tool. However, that digital signature that is here in SkySlope, that is the topic for next month's masterclass. So we'll really be diving into how to send out these zipForm documents with DigiSign for a digital signature. However, feel free to do that, get a head start in the meantime to see what that process looks like. But here inside of this section for zipForm, I have a few other options. If I want to take multiple different forms here, I have the ability to also assign them. What that allows me to do is assign them into a property file that I already have created. So a SkySlope transaction file or a SkySlope listing file. I could, let's say there's my listing, I could assign these documents over. Now that's not necessary if we're sending things out with DigiSign, but just know that you have that functionality. You also have the ability to add additional forms from our zipForm library. So if I created this zipForm transaction, I pulled in all of these forms initially from that zipForm template, but later on in the life cycle of this file, maybe I need an addendum. I can, rather than going back to zipForms, I could select Add Form here, find the addendum from my zipForm library, and add that right into my zipForm transaction to complete and then send out for a digital signature. Now, folks, we really have covered the basics of this zipForm section, which really is the zipForm Essentials Masterclass. One, getting our two accounts integrated, how to add in, our zipForm credentials for the integration, the two ways that we could create our zipForm Plus transaction, creating that here in SkySlope and individually pulling in forms, or creating that in zipForm directly to pull in our templates of documents. Again, if you don't see the templates there now, you can create those here in the template section of your own zipForm account. And then we walked through filling out these forms. Again, we select our document name here, and it opens up into a preview window for us here inside of SkySlope or back in zipForm. And then those few extra tools of sending things out for a digital signature, assigning documents to our property files, or adding new forms as needed. Now, what we'll do now is move over to the questions in that Zoom chat window. I know that there's a few that have come in. One question, missed the whole integration portion in the beginning, which is what I needed. Perfect. Well, let's go ahead and talk about that integration piece again. So when you first log into the system, where you go to initially integrate your two accounts is right under your name in the upper right. Click your name, and then you can go to the My Account section, where there is an entire tab dedicated to integrations. In this section, if you do not have your two accounts enabled yet, you will see this saying disabled. Select that and enable right here. So just make sure that this toggle is enabled. For our username, we enter our zipForm username and then our zipForm password. As soon as we have that entered, we can save, and the two accounts are successfully linked. One follow-up to that part of actually integrating your account with zipForm and SkySlope is in our support hub. So we click this icon with the headset in the upper right. It takes you to their support hub here, but we can search for zipForm. Once we do, we have this first knowledge base tutorial that shows SkySlope plus zipForm plus integration troubleshooting steps. So if you have any questions on how to integrate the two accounts, you can select this, and it really walks you through the entire process of how to get your zipForm credentials and how to integrate those within SkySlope. So again, to get to this integration page, we selected our support icon in SkySlope and then searched zipForm right here in this search bar. And it's just this first integration troubleshooting steps tutorial. Okay, so another question. So if we're using a template from zipForms, we need to set up the transaction in zipForms first, then we can open it in SkySlope with all the documents already there. That is absolutely correct. So what you'll do, again, to reiterate, is start inside of zipForms by creating a new zipForm transaction and pulling in your template here with the select template option. Again, these are just some demo options, but you can select your correct template here to pull in those documents. As soon as you create that transaction and pull in those documents, inside of SkySlope, you can access those inside of working documents in the zipForm tab. That's really the most streamlined way to open your zipForm transactions if you have those zipForm templates created. That way you're not individually pulling in your forms when you're first starting out with a client. Okay, so there is another question. Am I correct in that if we create the documents/transaction, whether through zipForms or SkySlope, it does not create a real listing or transaction in SkySlope unless we assign it? That is a great question. So if we create our zipForm transaction here or in zipForms directly, and we have our contracts here, that is not creating a true listing or transaction from SkySlope terminology. When you're first starting out with your clients, we really need to wait to start that real listing or transaction in SkySlope until we have the signed agreement. So when you're first starting out, you create that here. And then once you have the signed agreement, let's say you send these out with DigiSign and you're still waiting for the signed agreement, but you get that signed agreement back, that is when you create your listing or your transaction in SkySlope, which, absolutely correct to reiterate your point, it does not automatically create the listing or transaction in SkySlope just by creating the zipForm transaction. Now, after that initial transaction is created, let's say I have a new addendum that I need to fill out after I've already created my true zipForm, or pardon me, SkySlope listing or transaction. When I send this out with DigiSign here, and I'll just go to this first section, I have the ability to select any of my listing or transaction property files. And what that really does is it sends the document, once it's signed, back to this specific property file. So if I'm using DigiSign to send these out for a digital signature, I can send them out through here and select where I want them to go once signed. And then they'll go into the listings and transactions that I have created. So it's just that first time that you won't be able to select a property file since there hasn't been one created. And it looks like there is another point here in the chat from Monica, which is great. If you do have any questions on creating the templates inside of zipForm, again, those are the packets full of documents that pull into the zipForm file automatically here. You can reach out to your office manager or mentors, and they'll help you with creating those zipForm templates. I don't see any other questions. Actually, one just came in. But we have to create the listing or transaction or listing in SkySlope in order to assign the forms. What is the bare essential information we need to use to create the file in order for the cover sheet to fill in the information? So the first part of that question, yes. So if you wanted to take these documents and assign them to a file, which is in SkySlope a transaction or a listing, you would have already had to have created that listing or transaction from the main page of SkySlope. So creating a listing here or a transaction, that's where those addresses that we were just looking at were pulling from. The files, listings and transactions that I've already created. Now, the second part of that question, what is the bare essential information we need to use to create the file in order for the cover sheet to fill in the information? For zipForm, if you're creating the zipForm transaction, whether that be, if you're creating that here in SkySlope, the bare minimum information has a red asterisk next to it. So you would need a transaction name. We could do, my client, with his address. If we're working on a listing, you could name that what you choose. And then enter in that address. That's the bare minimum. You can add additional fields if necessary, but you don't need to. And that is the bare minimum to open up the actual zipForm transaction here. Now at this point, I could add more information to the cover sheet, and I can continue to add more information to the cover sheet as I have it available to me. So if I'm not quite sure of the sales price yet, I don't need to enter that in until I actually have it. But any information that you add to the cover sheet, if those fields match a field in one of these other contracts, that's when the information will pull over. Now, if you're creating the zipForm transaction here in zipForm, the bare minimum for, let's say, a listing is the name. What type of property is this? So we could say it's residential, and that's it. You do have that option, however, to apply the template, which pulls in those documents, but that's not required if you don't want to, if you're not utilizing those zipForm templates. All right, I don't see any other questions coming through the Zoom chat window. So what we'll do is we'll wrap up now. I did record this session. I'll send it over to the McColly real estate team and they can distribute it as needed. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to the SkySlope support team. Not only do we have a tutorial on integrating your two accounts, but we do have this whole tutorial on zipForm and SkySlope 101, which talks about integrating the account but it also just walks through how to create the transactions and whatnot, just like we did just now together. Now, with that said, thank you all so much for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and I will see you next masterclass.